Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Z segment discussing episode 3. And guys, I actually fixed the problem that you guys were pointing out in the comment section and referring to the actual Blue Yeti microphone. I fixed a little bit of the audio settings. And this video today, I will be talking the same as I do in every single video, as I'll talk about the plot, the action, interesting details, my impressions, and my thoughts on the episode as a whole. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So, let's start off by talking about the plot. Now, the very first thing I want to say about this plot is this plot was actually a direct comparison to what we see in Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods, in which we essentially see that little point at the beginning of the movie where we see Beerus on that faraway dimension, and he's essentially just talking to Whis about the whole Super Saiyan God prophecy and how he wanted to actually fight against the Super Saiyan God. And they essentially did the same exact thing in that they did in Super, but they just kind of portrayed it in a different way. As for example, you know, we see Bulma going on a cruise ship as opposed to actually being at the Capsule Corp as it originally took place in the movie. And essentially the whole plot of this movie was really just Beerus talking about the whole Super Saiyan God threat, why he wanted to fight the Super Saiyan God, confusing Super Saiyan with Super Saiyan God. And that's essentially it. There really isn't much to say about this plot. This plot really had a lot of dialogue, no real action, no real problem in it. However, we do see that there's a major concern of the Supreme Kais that's exaggerated significantly more in the actual Dragon Ball Super episode as opposed to the actual movie. And obviously, you know, with actually doing episodes, you have a lot more time to emphasize on certain things as opposed to a movie where you have a limited time frame. So that's essentially what happened in the plot. Not much to talk about here. We basically knew everything in this episode that already happened in the movie itself. So there really isn't much to say here. Now, moving on to action, there really isn't much to say here. As we saw in the previous episodes and the first 3 episodes as a whole, there really isn't that much action. However, we did see a little quick scene where we see Goku and Vegeta training, and we also saw a little flashback of Goku as a Super Saiyan fighting Frieza. But other than that, there really isn't much action in this episode. Like I said before, this episode was primarily devoted to actually focusing on the dialogue. So there really isn't much to say here in terms of rating it, but it was nice to see a little bit more of an updated animation of Goku's fight with Frieza. It was nice, even though I kind of have a little bit of a liking for the older animation style. But that essentially concludes the thoughts on the action sequences of this episode as a whole. So, moving on to some interesting details about this episode, there were several things that have kind of changed, I think, the whole perspective on Dragon Ball as a whole. And the first thing I wanted to point out is that now we can officially say, I guess it's canon, even though the canonicity of everything in Dragon Ball Z is always up for question. But now it's kind of canon that we can accept that the old Kai was officially sealed in the Z-Sword, and Toriyama has a way of doing this where he kind of takes something that was never really explained before and kind of just pops it into the show, similar to what we saw with Vegeta having a younger brother Tarbal and Tights in the Jocko the Galactic Patrolman series. And now we officially know that Beerus did seal the old Kai in the Z-Sword, so that's one interesting fact that I wanted to point out. The next thing I want to talk about is the whole advent of the Kais versus the Gods of Destructions and the whole God hierarchy in Dragon Ball Z now, or in Dragon Ball as a whole. What I find interesting is that there's always been a question as what defines a god, and essentially what's defined as a god more in the Dragon Ball series, not really with religious preferences, is a ruler or an overseer of some sort. And I'm going to do a thought for talk with Blackenfist in the future, talking a little bit more in depth about this. But in the episode, the Supreme Kai, or I'm sorry, the Elder Kai actually said that Kais like him are the ones that create life, and Beerus is like the antithesis. He actually is a god of destruction. He destroys to kind of balance out that. But as Blackenfist has pointed out in his actual Birds and Bees episode, we also have a Makaioshin, who's essentially like a demon, because Makai is actually the translation for demon in the show. And a Makaioshin is kind of like an anti-Supreme Kai that they banned away from their planet. And even though he's not officially canon because he's from a video game, looking at Demigro from the Dragon Ball Xenoverse video games, he has almost every single definition that there is to define him as a Makaioshin, especially because he's calling himself a demon god, and he's from the demon world, also known as the Makai world, which, you know, could go more into Yu Yu Hakusho and all those things. So Demigra definitely be considered a Makaioshin, also Deborah and Lucifer from the Dragon Ball series as a whole. So now that kind of like complicates a little bit more about the god hierarchy, but stay tuned for a thought for talk I'll do with Blackenfist in the future about that. But what I also wanted to point out about this whole thing is that now this is kind of solidifying that Dragon Ball Super is officially rewriting Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods, and we don't know so much about Fakatsu no F because Fakatsu no F hasn't actually arrived yet, and the whole arc can go in a completely different way. But now we officially can confirm that it's writing it off or rewriting it in a different way, considering all the differences in the details, how Bulma's going on a cruise ship as opposed to what originally happened, and the whole dialogue and everything in that sense of Beerus destroying those planets. Everything has changed. So we can officially say that Dragon Ball Super is going in a different direction, and that's an important detail to note. Now, moving on to my impressions of this episode. Overall, this was once again another lighthearted episode. Obviously, they're setting us up for the much more serious things to happen once Beerus arrives, along with Champa and all the other characters that are going to appear later on in the series. But the highlights of this episode were once again the comical moments. I like the little scene where we see Roshi peeking through the binoculars and the woman's about to take off her bra and like Chi-Chi jumps in front of him. That was a pretty funny scene. I also liked how when Krillin and Android 18 were in the car, I don't know why they would be driving in the first place, and then like they essentially fly out and everybody's freaking out because they just see these guys put their car in a capsule and just like fly away. That was also pretty funny. And another quick scene that I also found was pretty interesting is what we saw Beerus was actually in his hot tub, and Whis takes a look at his banana, and that essentially concludes like some of the main like comedy elements of this episode as a whole. I liked it. It was funny. It wasn't as funny as the first two episodes. I thought the first two episodes were significantly funnier, but overall this was another little lighthearted episode that really didn't advance the plot, but it was okay. So guys, that has been my video for today. Overall, I give this episode a 3 out of 5 stars. The reason why is because it really didn't have any plot that progressed the story, unlike the other 2 episodes. Even though they were lighthearted, they did progress the story in some way. And there was no action at all that we really didn't see before. A little bit of a training sequence, and we also saw that little flashback of Goku fighting Frieza, but that really isn't enough to really condemn it an action sequence as a whole. And ultimately, because of the fact that we kind of knew everything that was going to happen in this episode, there really wasn't much that this episode added to the series. It gave off the feeling as a filler episode, and out of the 3 episodes so far, I will definitely say this is by far the weakest. I thought the first 2 were great. I personally like 2 the best. I like 1 the second best, and this is definitely the weakest. But it was still an okay episode. It's not something I'm going to be rewatching in the future over and over again. But it was a nice episode. Obviously, I'll watch it when it comes out in English. But that concludes my video for today, guys. I have a lot more videos planned for you, like my death battle reaction. I also have a video that I planned out, which is my what if, but I'm going to save that for you. And I'm also have a lot more videos that I wanted to talk about. I obviously was a little bit bogged down, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for my predictions. I'm going to bring those right back, guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.